most of the time what I have seen, and maybe your experience, Scott and Harrison, is a little different from mine, I don't know, but it's tended to be the other way around, where the sermon does a little bit of exposition, 5-10 minutes, and then in some cases, and I've heard lots of this, you get 30 minutes of application. And the application tends to be either doctrinal, which then in our circles is known as doctrinal preaching, or he's a doctrinal preacher, they'll say, or it'll be moral or ethical. And that sort of preaching is known in the circles in which I run ecclesiastically as ethical preaching. And there are other models where that application can be about your spiritual life or your soul or something like that. And in those cases, I have felt typically as if the solution to the problem is to pay attention to the text. And when there's a brief exposition and a 30-minute application, rarely is the sermon really driven by the text. And that was the education that I got in seminary was, Dr. Bergsman used to quote R.B. Kuyper, "Men, in every sermon there are 3 points, the text, the text, the text." And then he used to quote Kuyper, who used to say, "Men, your job is to preach the text, the whole text, and nothing but the text. So help you God." And we were taught to preach the text redemptive historically, but to let the text drive the sermon. And when you do a brief exposition and a 30-minute application, then in my experience, that tends to turn the text into a springboard for things that the preacher wants to say. And I think one key to balance is to, preach a variety of texts so that you're not just preaching, historical texts or narrative texts. There's a whole range of texts in Scripture that should be preached, but that the sermon really has to be driven by the text. And if we understand the text correctly, that a good, sound, exegetical understanding of the text, redemptive historical understanding, a contextual understanding both broadly and narrowly, will lead the congregation to Christ. I mean, not to say that's the only thing you do, but that seems to me that's one way to avoid the problem of imbalance, whether imbalance focusing on the objective or imbalance focusing on the subjective. That is, what about me and my issues, my needs, or whatever.